Hello friends, in the past few lectures we have been attempting to relate or make use of our understanding of these thermodynamical concepts to realize or to identify which phase would be stable or which state of a unary material would be stable for a given combination of pressure and temperature. So we have spent quite some time in understanding the thermodynamic concepts. We have spent some time understanding the different thermodynamic laws. Now we are essentially putting it into practice, and that practice or that application we have largely focused on. So far it has been focused on the unary material. So this unary material, its characteristic feature is, so whatever discussion we have had is based on this unary material, and the characteristic feature of this unary material or the distinguishing feature of this unary material is it is made up of a single form of a component, and this component can be atom, ions or molecules. Now the way we employ our understanding of the thermodynamical concepts to understand which phase would be stable for a given combination of temperature and pressure so far is that we began identifying which variable would be appropriate to describe the change in the state of the system for a material for our in relation to our physical world. And when we assumed that, or when we consider that it is rather easy for us to manipulate the temperature and pressure in a laboratory setup, we considered a function which varied with these two specific variables, that is temperature and pressure, and we began with considering the change in the Gibbs free energy with respect to temperature and pressure. So this was our starting point for our discussion, wherein we employed our thermodynamic understanding to identify which would be the stable state for a given combination or for a given condition. So this was the starting point. The way we proceeded is we assumed the change in this thermodynamic function is dependent on one independent variable first. So we assumed that initially the Gibbs free energy changes with respect to temperature alone, and the other independent variable, which is the pressure, is constant. And when we did that, instead of treating this expression purely numerically, we used an approach wherein we involved illustration to understand how the Gibbs free energy changes with respect to temperature. Now, even though we are rather representing this expression graphically or illustrating this expression, we were clear about introducing all the features or all the critical aspects of this expression here in this illustration, meaning the change in the Gibbs free energy because of the negative expression associated with this term here. We ensured that the slope of this curve that related the Gibbs free energy with the temperature is negative. In addition to that, we also ensured the first derivative represents the entropy of that particular material, that particular unary system. And in addition to that, we also focused on the second derivative, the higher order derivative of the Gibbs free energy with respect to the temperature. This consideration of the different aspects of this term here, this expression here, this Gibbs free energy expression here, helped us understand that even though we are considering a single material, depending on the state of the material, the change in the Gibbs free energy varies with temperature. So depending on the state of a given material, the entropy change will vary. The entropy of that material will vary. So therefore, we were able to realize that even though we are focused on a simplistic system of a unary material made up of a single form of a component, for a different state that component assumes, or different state that material assumes, we need to have different curves that represents the change in the Gibbs free energy with respect to temperature. So ultimately, we end up representing the change in the Gibbs free energy with respect to temperature for the different states this particular system assumes. So here we have liquid and solid state. So once we were able to arrive at this illustration of how the Gibbs free energy changes with respect to temperature, assuming the other variable is constant, we imposed the second law of thermodynamics. So even though the second law of thermodynamics, it states that for a spontaneous change to occur, the Gibbs free energy of the end state should be less than that of the original state. So this is what drives the spontaneous reaction The corollary of this understanding is the system to be stable at a given condition, its Gibbs free energy should be at its minimal most point. So that is the one way of viewing the second law of thermodynamics. When we impose that particular perspective of the second law of thermodynamics to our understanding or to our graphical representation of how Gibbs free energy changes with temperature, we were able to identify the section of these curves that helped us realize which phase would be stable for a given temperature. So based on this expression, introducing the second law of thermodynamics, under constant pressure, we were now able to state which phase would be stable for a given temperature. Now we extended the study, we relaxed or we replaced the variable that is constant to the actual variable. So here in this case we consider the isothermal change, the pressure is varying and the Gibbs free energy correspondingly also changes. Now despite the change in the variables, we need to again follow this expression here. We need to capture the characteristic feature of this expression here, meaning the change in the Gibbs free energy with respect to pressure should have a positive slope, and that slope should indicate a specific volume. And when we do that, we arrive at this form of this trend of a schematic curve that relates Gibbs free energy to pressure. And again, since this slope is associated with a volume, a material parameter, so correspondingly, even though we are considering a single form of material, that is unary material, for each state this material assumes, we need to have different curves that relate the Gibbs free energy to that of the pressure. So what essentially we have done is we have considered the expression for a function, thermodynamic function with respect or that relates towards different variables, and based on that we, instead of treating it numerically, we simplified it, we broken it down into two different expression that relates Gibbs free energy to change in temperature, the Gibbs free energy to change in pressure, and we captured the essential aspects of it and we illustrated how the Gibbs free energy changes with temperature and separately and pressure separately. And in the previous lecture we combined it so that now the Gibbs free energy is governed not only by an independent or a single independent variable, but it is rather collectively influenced by both temperature and pressure, and the response is we captured in the z-axis. Now that we are considering the cumulative effect, the collective effect of both temperature and pressure on the Gibbs free energy, we arrive at this three-dimensional setup. We arrive at this three-dimensional framework. Because of this transition from the two-dimension to three-dimension framework, we have to extend the representation of how the Gibbs free energy changes with respect to change in both temperature and pressure. So therefore, this curve here, these curves here that represented the change in the function with respect to the corresponding variable, not variables but variable, this assumes a form in this three-dimensional representation wherein the function changes with the corresponding variables. Here it assumes a form of a surface. So this we saw in our previous lecture. So these curves that we saw here, they are replaced by these surface here. Even though because of the curves of the dimensionality, which is often the curves of the dimensionality is the one that leads to the extension of the lines here to the planes here. Despite this change or despite the transition from the single plot to the surfaces in this three-dimensional representation, the characteristic features remains the same, which is for a given state you need to have an individual distinct representation. So even though we are considering a single material, for its state that it assumes, we need to have a separate representation of how Gibbs free energy changes with respect to temperature and pressure. So therefore we need to have, even though we are considering a single system, we need to have distinct curves that represents the individual state of the system. Now what this three-dimensional representation gives us is how the Gibbs free energy changes, or in addition to that, what is the exact value of the Gibbs free energy when there is a change in temperature and pressure. So for a given combination of temperature and pressure, what is the exact value of the Gibbs free energy. So the three-dimensional consideration only comes when we want to know what is the exact Gibbs free energy for a given combination of temperature and pressure. So when I have a combination, when I have a definite condition, say for the simplistic case, we have my laboratory condition, which is atmospheric pressure and room temperature. For this condition, what should be the exact Gibbs free energy can be rendered by, or it can be gathered from this representation here. However, often it is not what we are interested in. This being our introductory understanding, or this being our introductory study, often what we are interested in is which phase is rather stable for my given condition. So if I am in the room temperature, if I am in my laboratory and I'm considering this material here, I want to know what would be the stable state of that particular material. So since my understanding, or since my requirement is not to measure or to identify or to estimate exactly what is the Gibbs free energy for my laboratory condition, the combination of temperature and pressure, but my interest is largely on which state will be the stable one, then what can be done is we can just section this plane, that is pressure temperature plane, into distinct region that shows which state is stable. So again, like we considered in the previous lecture, we can stand here and look above, and when we do so, whatever surface we find can be demarcated in this plane here. If in this when I look above and I find in this region it is the red curve that assumes the minimal Gibbs energy value, then I can demarcate it in this pressure temperature plane. And here if it is the blue curve, then I can correspondingly represent it in this pressure temperature curve. And now when I represent this pressure temperature plane, what I would end up having is I would be considering the pressure and temperature, these two thermodynamic variables, but what I would end up having is I would be sectioning this pressure temperature plane into specific regions. So I would be sectioning this pressure temperature plane into specific region, where each region it indicates which phase would be stable in that combination of pressure and temperature. So from this, by imposing the condition that, or by just focusing on my requirement that I don't need the specific value of the Gibbs free energy, all that I need is for my condition which phase or which state assumes a minimal most Gibbs free energy is all that I am interested in. Because of that condition, we are able to translate this three-dimensional representation to two-dimensional one that comprises of this plane here, that is pressure and temperature plane, and all that we have done is based on the minimal most position or minimal most Gibbs free energy assumed by these surfaces here. We were able to section this plane, pressure temperature plane, into several regions, and that each of these regions they indicate which phase is stable, and therefore what we have is we have certain combination of pressure and temperature. So all these regions, so they indicate combinations of pressure and temperature. So I have a set of conditions wherein we solve it as stable, a set of condition wherein the liquid is stable, and set of condition wherein the vapor phase of this unit. So we have a single material, three different states, physical states, and they have stability, or they are stable under a specific combination of pressure and temperature. So this is what we refer to as the phase diagram, and this we saw in our previous lecture. In addition to these specific regions, in the phase diagram we also have these lines that partition one region from another. If you look closely, what these lines indicate, or what these lines are, so these lines are essentially, they are collection of points, and these points they indicate or they correspond to, so these lines are collection of points that correspond to the combination of pressure and temperature wherein two states are stable. So along these points or along these lines, we have stability or equilibrium established between the two phases. So along this line here, you have a stability established between solid and the vapor phase. Along this line here, you have a stability established between the liquid and the vapor phase. And along this line here, you have a stability established between solid and liquid phase. So these lines are nothing but collection of points, the collection of the condition between pressure and temperature condition wherein two phases, solid liquid, solid gas, and liquid gas exhibit or establish an equilibrium between them. They coexist in a stable state. And finally, we have a triple point wherein all these three phases or all these three states they coexist, and there is a stability between, or there is an equilibrium between all these three phases. Now, in a previous lecture, just to complete what we saw, what we considered earlier, we also saw that how these lines vary within a phase diagram, particularly when the phase diagram is represented, particularly when the phase diagram is of the unary system that is represented by temperature and pressure, how these lines vary. So what can we understand, how can we understand the trend in this line? We saw that it follows this particular Clapeyron's equation. Now, even though we have been considering the unary system, a system that is made up of a single component, what we have so far been doing is we have been using two terms synonymously. Since these two terms, that is, we have been using the term phase and state synonymously. So far we have been using these two terms, that is phase and state, synonymously. So when we say, so far when we stated that liquid, solid and gas, so these are the physical states of the system, and we also often in this context we have also treated them, or we have referred to them as phases, and that's the reason we refer to this as the phase diagram. However, you might have already know that the term phase, it assumes a specific value or specific meaning in the context of material. It assumes a specific meaning. So what specific meaning? So there are numerous definitions of phases from a materials perspective. From a metallurgical perspective, there are numerous definitions for phases. Now, simplistically, in order to differentiate between the state that we have been considering so far and the phases that we are interested in, so let us consider what the states mean. So when we say that the given unary material, it exhibits, or it is in the solid state, it is in the liquid state, and it is in the vapor state, what we are essentially considering is we are treating this material in a macroscopic scale. We are looking at material as it is, and we are considering its physical state, and we are stating it as solid, liquid and vapor. Now, from the materials perspective, because material as being a materials engineer or a metallurgist, what we are interested in is not just the macroscopic state of the system, but also we want to look closely what is happening within the material. So as far as we are concerned, as far as the macroscopic view is concerned, a solid remains solid. The solid is holistically or completes a solid block of the unary material. The liquid is a liquid form of the unary material. And when we say that, okay, this is a solid form of the unary material, what we implicitly assume is within this solid material there is no distinction. Within this solid material it is completely homogeneous. So that is essentially what we assume. But when we look closely within the solid, particularly if this unary material is a metal, when you look closely into the solid, particularly again a metal which has taken a solid state, what we observe is the atoms, the characteristic atoms of this unary material, it occupies a specific position in the three-dimensional space. So it is not randomly distributed within the solid. When the unary system is a metal, the corresponding atoms, they occupy a specific positions in the three-dimensional space. So from the macroscopic view, it is a solid, but when we look closely, there are specific positions occupied by this atom. So often, because these specific positions are regular and this regularity is in the long range, they are represented by what is referred to as the unit cell. So when you consider the way, or when you look closely on each of these states, particularly the solid state of a unary material, again the material remains the same. What changes is our perspective. The material still is the unary material. The material still comprises of the single form of a component alone, say single form of an atom alone. And now, instead of treating it macroscopically, we are looking it closer. Particularly, we are looking the solid state of the unary material closer, and we observe that there is a specific position occupied by the components of the unary material, and it is a long-range regular arrangement of these atoms, and these are represented by unit cells. Now, it is possible that these atoms can occupy different position depending on the temperature and pressure. So for a given temperature and pressure, these atoms can occupy a specific position. For another combination of temperature and pressure, these atoms can occupy another configuration. So all that we are interested. So when we say the solid is a crystalline this metal is a crystalline solid, what we mean by that is there is a regular arrangement of the atoms in the long range. But this regular arrangement can be achieved in different configuration. Just when we consider a unit mesh, instead of unit cell, which is a three-dimensional one, we can consider a unit mesh, which is a three-dimensional or two-dimensional simplification of the unit cell. I don't want to get into the specifics, but generally, when you consider the unit mesh, this is possible for the atoms to be regularly arranged in this way. So, in this way, the atoms can be arranged. The one other way the atoms can be arranged is something like this. Okay, assuming these are symmetric and all those things that comes with it. So there are two possible ways the atoms of the unary system can arrange itself in a solid state. So this is one way and this is another way. Now in both these cases, both these establishes a crystalline solid. So in both these cases, you have long range regular arrangement of the atoms. However, the configuration, the motif in one is different from the configuration in the other. So therefore, what we essentially have is, we have a distinction within the solid, that is one is different, one configuration is different from another. So therefore, even though both these form a solid state, so both these are part of the solid state, both these are not similar. So meaning one is different from another, one is distinguishable from another. So in the context of material science and metallurgy, we refer to these as phases. So when you have a solid and one section of it is comprised of the phase 1, the other section of it comprised of phase 2, then there is a clear distinction between the one section of the solid from the other section of the solid. So macroscopically, even though this particular unary material appears or is in the solid state, if you look closely at the atomic configuration, you will observe that this particular solid, one section of it, the solids have a specific configuration. The atoms of the solid, they have a specific configuration when compared to the other. So it means within the solid, there are two distinct regions that are present, and these are in the context, or these are referred to as the phases. And since we are restricting ourselves to the unary system, the possible distinction, the most possible distinction between one section from the other section is from the arrangement of the atoms, from the crystalline arrangement of the atoms. And here in this phase, there is a different arrangement, and in this phase, there is a different arrangement. And what arrangement does this unary system assumes depends on the combination of temperature and pressure. So what we mean by that is, this representation of the phases, this phase diagram, it implicitly assumes that the maximum possible number of states for the given unary system is at this point, and that is 3. So this phase diagram here, it implicitly assumes that the maximum number of phases at a given point, or the maximum number of phases this particular unary material as can assume is 3. So there are only 3 different phases a given this particular unary material can assume. However, it is not the case always. Often, when the unary material is metal, there are possibilities of that metal assuming 2 different atomic configuration, assuming 2 different crystal structures. So because of the atoms assuming the specific positions or the long range regular arrangement of the atom, it is possible for us to relate that arrangement to crystal structures, to a specific trend, and that we can call it as the crystal structures. So these, I believe you would have learnt, or you would have been learning, or you would have learnt in your earlier courses. So what we essentially have is, we have a single unary system comprising of a single form of a component, and this component, this atom, ion or molecule, so what they are, or the way it is established, or the way it is arranged in the solid, it is possible to have 2 or more different configuration. It is possible for the unary material to assume a different configuration or a different crystal structure. And each of these crystal structure or each of these arrangement, the solid with the specific arrangement is treated as a separate phase. And this is what we refer to as the allotrophy. So what we mean by allotrophies is that, or allotrophy is that a material, a unary material, a simple metal element, it changes its crystal structure as the variables, that is temperature and pressure, changes. And even though on the macroscopic scale, all this overall material is in the solid state, when you look closely, there is a difference in the way the atoms, the components of these materials are arranged. So therefore, for a given configuration, this material is referred to as a phase. So a phase has its unique configuration. Even though the phase is in the solid state, it has a unique configuration. So depending on the crystal structure, the nature of the crystal structure, you have different phases that are possible within the solid state, and this is observed in matter. So one common example is iron. And the iron at room temperature assumes a body-centered crystal structure. There is a specific way in which the iron is arranged at the room temperature. The atoms of ions are arranged at the room temperature. But as you increase a temperature, there is at above a specific temperature, this changes from the body-centered crystal structure to a face-centered one. And after beyond a specific temperature, so you keep on eating. So this is as the temperature increases. So you keep on heating the particular the block of iron. Initially it is a body center. The arrangement is of a specific form, and as you keep on heating this block of iron, the arrangement reconfigures itself and assumes a new crystal structure. And if you further keep on heating it, you end up back with the BCC crystal structure. So this transition, what we observe is all these occurs while the iron block, the unary iron block, is solid. So macroscopically it remains solid, but when you look closely, we see that there is a phase transition occurring. Initially it was in BCC, then FCC, and it gets back to BCC. There is a phase transition. So macroscopically you might say, okay, there are only three phases that iron can assume. So there are only three states that iron can assume, pure iron can assume. So that is when you treat just the physical state of the iron. However, when you look closely, in addition to these states, in addition to these physical states, there are different phases that iron assumes. And these different phases are, in this context, is distinguished by the crystal structure alone. Again, in this context, meaning we are explicitly considering, or we are exclusively considering, the unary system. And therefore, what we observe is the possibility of one phase differing from another is largely the way in which the corresponding component is being arranged. So in that case, what we observe is, even though macroscopically a given block of iron can be solid, liquid, or gas, when you look closely, it can be of different phases which are distinguished by the way in which these atoms are arranged. So therefore, this phase diagram is no longer sufficient for us to predict which phase would be stable for a given combination of temperature and pressure. So far we have been treating, for our understanding, to arrive at the phase diagram, we have been considering the state as, we have been treating both the term phase and state synonymously. However, once you look closely, once you observe the crystal arrangement, particularly within the solid, there are distinctions in certain unary material. These are referred to as the allotrophy. And if we consider unary material that is made up of molecules, a similar form of molecules, and in those unary materials that are made up of molecules, when they are distinguished in the solid state, when they are distinguished by the arrangement, the crystal structure, it is referred to as the polymorphism. So depending on which unary material is exhibiting the difference in the crystallographic arrangement within the solid state, we have different terminologies. One is allotrophy. It is for metals or unary material that are made up of atoms or ions, when your atoms largely. When your unary material is made up of molecules, then in that case what you establish, or what you observe, is the difference in the crystal structures is referred to as the polymorphism. So you have same components which are arranging themselves in a different manner for a given combination of temperature and pressure. So here is the example of how the ion changes when you, or the pure ion, the atomic arrangement of the pure ion changes as you increase the temperature. So what this ultimately means is that just the consideration of the state, or considering or equating the states to the phases, will no longer be sufficient even for the unary system. So we need to extend our phase diagram. So we need to extend the change in the Gibbs free energy with the temperature curve to include all these different phases. And when we do that, the phase diagram that comprehensively, or that includes all the phases for the ion at least, is of this form, wherein you section the solid region into different parts, and each corresponds to each of the phases that we observe. So initially all these region was categorized under solid, and now that we have understood, even within the solid, the unary ion rather, it assumes a different phase. It is the possibility of this ion assuming a different phase, assuming a different configuration. We are required to include those phases in this phase diagram. So therefore we have a more detailed phase diagram wherein the section of the solid is partitioned into several regions to include all the different phases the ion assumes. So here it will be PCC, the one that is at the room temperature, here FCC, and here again PCC, alpha, gamma and delta. So these are alpha ion, gamma ion and delta ion. So here we have liquid and here we have the vapor. So again this is just a schematic. So what we need to understand here, not always, even for the unary system, the state is equivalent to that of the phases. There is a difference established, particularly within the solid, when the way the components that constitute the solid are differently arranged. It is possible for us to distinguish one phase from another. So that rather winds up our discussion on how, based on our understanding of the thermodynamic function and its relation to the variable, we are able to predict what would be the phase of, what would be the stable phase for a given unary system at a specific condition, and the condition so far has been the combination of pressure and temperature, and we have rather largely restricted ourselves to this combination of pressure and temperature primarily because this is the variables that we will be playing around or will be working on in our laboratory setup. So therefore we have restricted it to these variables, and these variables, they relate to the thermodynamic function of Gibbs free energy. So our discussion so far has largely been based on or oriented towards, or it has been rendered by the expression for the Gibbs free energy. So we have considered unary system, and we have seen that in a unary system, even though macroscopically it's the state that indicates the phase, when you look closely it is possible for us to observe other phases within the macroscopic solid state of the unary system. Now let us move on from the unary system to other forms of the system that we usually come across in our laboratory settings. So all that we are doing, all the discussions that we have been having so far have one thing in common, or it has one direction that we are progressing, meaning we are attempting to relate, even though thermodynamics is largely a theoretical study, its theoretical aspect, we are attempting to relate whatever we are studying to the physical world. It applies for the law, different laws that we have considered, it applies for the different thermodynamic functions we have considered, it applies for the different ways we express these thermodynamic functions. Ultimately what we want to do is we want to relate whatever we are studying in this course to the laboratory condition, to the physical world. We are not ready to confine ourselves or restrict ourselves to the theoretical realm alone. We want to manipulate, or we want to rather understand this theoretical foundation of the thermodynamics in such a way that we are able to relate it to the physical world. So in order to do so, we will move away from the unary systems to solutions. So we will consider the thermodynamics of the solution. Now the question often arises is, the question that might pop up is that since as a materials and metallurgical engineer we are largely focused on using a material in its solid state. Very rarely we consider, as a physicist or a chemist, very rarely we want to study the nature of the solution, because we want to study a given material in its solid state. We want to study its properties. We want to use that material for different technological advancements, and we want to help these advancements by providing the suitable material in its solid state. Then why we need to consider, or what is the need for considering the solution, or what does the solution mean in the context of a metallurgist or in the context of a materials engineer? Like we saw, given the context, the word assumes a different meaning. So we saw that the same is the case for the phase, it's the case for the state. So in the earlier context, the phase and the state, they were equivalent, and we saw that they are no longer equivalent when we look at it from a metallurgist perspective. The same goes for solution. What we mean by that is, solution of course is often synonymous to a liquid solution, wherein you combine one liquid to another liquid or one liquid to a solid. A simplistic case is you mix salt with water, you end up having a solution. Now, in addition to that, it is also possible for us to have solution in a solid state. So what we mean by that is, we saw particularly in metals, the components that constitute a metal, be it atoms or ion, they occupy specific position in the three-dimensional space. So the metals, so we as metallurgists, we are focusing, so the discussion begins as from the metals. So for a metal, when you solidify it, the atoms of that specific metal, it occupies a specific position in the three-dimensional space. And this, because this position is regular, and it is this regularity is in the long range order, it is over a very it is not rather confined to a specific region alone. What we have is, it is possible for us to represent this position of the atoms in the solid using a crystal or unit cell. So it is possible for us to represent the position of the atoms, the metal or the position the metal atoms assume in the solid. It can be represented using a unit cell. So this is how typically a unit cell would look like. This is a simplistic example, and in each of these vertices you have an atom that is being placed. So this is a simplistic unit cell, a simple cubic unit cell, and let's say this is a simple cubic unit cell. Now, so this is a characteristic feature of metals, because metals are crystalline solids, and the atoms, they occupy specific position in this unit cell. Of course, apart from cesium, I guess there are no metal that assumes this simple cubic crystal structure, but nevertheless, let us, for our discussion, let us consider a crystalline metal that assumes this particular, the atoms of this metal are arranged in this manner. Now, when you add another metal, a small quantity of another metal, when this particular metal is in its liquid state. So you have this particular metal in its liquid state, and in addition to this particular metal, you have add some traces of another metal. So say for instance you have 99% or so you have 80% of the given you have 80% of your actual metal, and to that you had some 20% of another metal. When this particular, the primary metal, the metal that we are interested in is this solid, or it's in the liquid state, you melt the other metal as well. So this, let it be A, and you melt this other metal as well, B, and then you combine these two in the liquid state. So you are combining the liquid A, the metal A, and the traces B in its liquid state, and then you are solidifying it. And when you are solidifying it, since the solution, so to speak, that comprises of both metal A and B, since it comprises predominantly of A, these A atoms of A begin to arrange themselves in a specific crystal structure. They begin to arrange themselves in this manner here. Now, under certain condition, it is possible that because of this B here, because we have also included B here, if the solidification has occurred for a pure metal A, then all the atoms here would be of the same metal. So all the atoms here would be identical. If the solidification has occurred for a pure metal A, then in that case, the atoms that occupy these points here will be identical. It will be of the metal A. Now that we have included another metal, a traces of another metal, or we have included a solute here, so this traces or B we refer to as the solute. So now that we have included the solute here, and this atom, or it is still predominantly occupied by, the crystal structure is predominantly occupied by A, it is possible that the B atom occupies a specific position within this crystal structure here. So it replaces one of the A atom with the B atom. Now what we have essentially then arrived at is, even when you look closely, the whole material, the solid state, is homogeneous. Macroscopically it is solid. Even when we look closely, it is homogeneous. The only difference is, in the atomistic scale, you have the one atom replaced, one A atom replaced by B atom. So what we essentially observe is, when you look from the microscopic scale, when you consider the crystal structure like we have considered here, we still have the same crystal structure. There is no difference in the crystal structure. When we look macroscopically, what we observe is, we have the same homogeneous solid state of this combination of A and B. But only when you look atomistically, when you look even closer to what are the positions of the atom, only then you are able to distinguish between the A atom and B atom. Now, when you compare this arrangement to your solution of water and salt, you put some salt into a beaker of water, you mix it. Macroscopically, you won't be able to distinguish the salt and the water. So when it is completely dissolved, you won't be able to distinguish between salt and the water. Even when you look closely, you won't be able to distinguish between the salt and the water. Only when you look microscopically or atomistically, you will be able to distinguish water molecules from the ions of sodium and chlorine. So in that case, that we refer to as the solution, and the same way it has whatever features the solution of salt and water has, the same feature is observed here. Meaning, macroscopically it's a single state. Even microscopically there is no change in the crystal structure, and only the differences in the atomistic scale. So therefore, since the solution is observed in the solid state, we refer to it as the solid solution. So when we are moving away from the unary system, it is possible that we will land at a solid solution. So a simplistic transition from a unary system to a binary system. Unary system comprises of a single component, but the binary system comprises of two components. A simplistic transition would be, from moving, instead of moving directly from unary system to the binary system, a simplistic transition would be solid solution, wherein the two components are completely dissolved. So you would have a solid solution when the components are dissolved in such a way that these atoms, they occupy specific positions without bringing about much change into the configuration. So here the simple cube configuration remains the same. Only difference is one atom of A is replaced by B. So therefore, even microscopically and macroscopically, there is no distinction between the two different phases. A region seems homogeneous. Only in the atomistic level you are able to see a difference, but as a whole everything is homogeneous. Now this is referred to as the substitutional solid solution, because one atom is replaced by another atom. The other one, it is also possible that in addition to or a different atom, say a different B atom, instead of occupying these positions here, so these are positions that are that A atoms usually occupy, that is the solvent usually occupies. Instead of occupying these positions, it is also possible for the B atoms to occupy some interstitial, the positions between these actual atoms. Again, by intuition you can state that which position the B atom occupies depends on its size. Then of course you would be right. So essentially what we have is, it is possible for us to have a solid solutions. The solid solution, they are no longer a unary system, and these are form of a binary system. And the solid solution, in what we essentially observe is, there is no macroscopic distinction in the phases. The distinction comes only when we look closer, and when we see that in addition to the actual atoms there are some additional atoms that are observed. This would be the interstitial solid solution. So this is referred to as the interstitial solid solution. because the newly added solute atoms, the newly added alloying atoms, they occupy this interstitial spots, and here we refer to as the substitutional solid solution. So the solid solution can also be referred to as the alloys. So this is what we have when we say metals and alloys. So these are the alloys, and these solute are often referred to as the alloying elements. So a good transition between the unary and to other system, the systems wherein there are more components associated with it, is by treating them, or the simplistic way of considering those would be considering them as a solution. And by understanding the thermodynamics of solution, you would be able to understand the system that comprises of more than one components, and that is the reason why we will be focusing on, in the upcoming lectures, the thermodynamics of solution. So with this, we would wind this lecture up, and in the upcoming lectures we will discuss on we will focus on the thermodynamics of solution. Goodbye.